Hi everyone. I decided to do a video blog, I guess, for my week 3 reflection. And so my overarching question, sort of thought process that I'm going to go through is about whether or not archaeology is a science and the legacy and sort of the weight it carries in choosing or not choosing to be a part of that field. Okay. Start off when I first went into um this week 3, I thought, okay, no, archaeology is definitely a humanity. It's humanity, and that was further emphasized to me by the fact that one of the first lines is it says, "Oh yeah, archaeology is considered to be a part of anthropology." And for me, I'm like, okay, that makes sense. Definitely anthro, humanity, archaeology, humanity, done deal. Don't even need to debate anymore. Um, However, as we go through the book, the first thing they talk about is the scientific method, which is the basis of all sciences. There's not many things that bind, I mean, there are many things that bind the sciences together, but the basis, one of the first pages of every science textbook, it talks about the scientific method, which is you have a hypothesis, you find evidence to prove it, you confirm or deny this hypothesis. It's a very, like, not great, but more or less definition. And they archaeology goes on to describe this scientific method. They say, they chose to move from this idea of old archaeology, which is where they make these grand sort of sweeping ideas and say what they think. They wouldn't necessarily find evidence to confirm or deny a specific question. They wouldn't do that beforehand. And when they move into new archaeology, which is now the standard to my understanding from the textbook, they go through this process of explaining, induction, and more specifically specificity. I hope I said that right. They are finding something specific. They have a specific question, a specific goal, and they will seek that out. They're not just, digging and searching. And so for me, I'm thinking, okay, and if you go through chapters 3 and 4, heavy science focus, and even more specifically, geology focus, which I found to be very interesting. I took intro to geology last fall, so I know a little petite bit of geology, and it's geology. It was just straight up geology. This image that they showed was one of the things that really flagged this up to me. I don't know if you see. I'm gonna try and also turn the cameras to show you, but it looks near identical to this activity they made us do in in geology, where it shows you how to sort of decide which sediments or materials were laid first. And I'm just gonna flip my camera, and as you can see, it's near identical sort of stratification, and it's called the same thing. They talk about carbon dating, they talk about this and that, and it's geology is what I realized in these first couple chapters, that archaeology, the guts of it, is geology, which of course is undisputably a science, but sort of like the skin, sorry to use all this body language, but sort of the outside shell is covered in this layer of, okay, human culture. But for me, my thought process is, shouldn't, like, the guts, the inside, the meat of the subject be what it is? I'm taking this other class talking about dinosaurs, and so I have a bit of knowledge, 3 weeks worth of knowledge about paleontology, and archaeology and paleontology and the methods they use and everything are running right alongside each other. But archaeology is considered to be under anthropology, but paleontology is considered to be under geology, kind of, similar thing. I mean, we could talk about that. I mean, paleontology is its own field, but like it's under the wider umbrella of geology, and I'm wondering why I'm reading and I'm wondering why archaeology isn't a part of it. At one point, they talk about this particular method. They talk about magnetic dating, also known as paleomagnetic dating. I mean, it's just all in there, and the only difference is this outer layer of the fact that archaeology studies people, studies human culture, and I think this removal of archaeology from science, even though all the other things about it describe it as a science, to just jump off briefly, in that class I talked about previously, we've had various paleontologists come in, and one thing they mention is the way they decide what a species is in the things that are in common. They don't decide, okay, this is a mammal, this is a vertebrate, this is a this is a that. By looking at the differences, they look at the things they have in common, and that's with the way classification works generally. And so I'm wondering, in the classification of archaeology, why did they use the one difference it has from all the other scientific pairs to differentiate that away from it? Everything about archaeology, except the fact that it studies human culture, is is a science. I mean, like I said, chapters 3 and 4 is like 2 weeks of my geology class that I took. And I think it comes from like these kind of subjects that are like sort of shifted into humanities, even though they're clearly a science. If I have to pick a box to put it in, I would prefer not to, but I'm gonna do what I have to do. But it's sort of rooted in this like idea that humans are somehow separate from the environment with which we live in, which is interesting because one thing they talk about is about how like the feature it's the artifact is found in, where it comes from is so important to understanding the object, the artifact as a whole. But when we talk about examining and understanding the human experience and human past, human history, development of human culture, and archaeology particularly, we're taking ourselves away from the earth and the trees and the dinosaurs and this thing and that thing. That's a completely different study. Oh, that's different. That's archaeology. That's humanities. The paleontology. Oh, da, da, da. Even though there's a lot to be learned, and I know 3 weeks of information about these two fields, but I think a lot can be gained to not think of them as being separate. And now I'm not saying these two fields don't interact, I'm sure they do, and I'm not saying people in either fields don't know about the other, but I think in just the way we think about paleontology and archaeology, I'm using paleontology and archaeology because it's very, 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 very similar. It speaks loudly to the way humans sort of feel this sort of self-importance about certain things and about themselves, and in that I feel like certain subjects sort of get thrown where they shouldn't be. I'm trying not to make this too long. But moving on from that, so basically I think that archaeology is a science. I could talk more about that at another point. But moving on, with this idea that archaeology is a science, it comes with this sort of baggage that I feel like a lot of sciences have. We're studying it right now in not my paleontology class, in my dinosaur class. And it's this legacy of like sort of undermining and just forgetting about certain groups of people. The first people I want to flag up is women. Even the way the textbook, one thing the textbook talks about is about how once they found these remains, they thought it was transvestite because it was impossible for a woman to be buried in this particularly honorable and rich way, which is just ridiculous. They're willing to ignore all other evidence that definitely point like, okay, no, this is definitely true, because it didn't fit a particular narrative they wanted it to go in. And I mean, I don't even have to get into details in the way that science has done this over and over again to groups, because science is the objective truth, and this is the category, this is the way it is, and they just ignore what is really in front of them. Another thing that I found interesting is the way that the book seems to, it addresses sexism. They go, oh wow, these women, look at them, they did these things. But I noticed that the information about the women who have made leaps and strides in archaeology is always separate. It was always, okay, we're talking about archaeology, we're like, oh my gosh, the carbon dating, oh my gosh, da, 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 da. Found the bones, oh my gosh, found the pots, da, da, da. And then they stop, and then they go, okay, now let's talk about the women, sidebar, oh my gosh, look at the women, they did all these things, it was so awesome. Okay, back to the regular schedule program, and they stop again. Instead of treating the findings that the women in this field discovered as just an integral part of archaeology. And I think the way that the textbook is organized says a lot about the field itself. I may be putting too much on Colin and Paul as the uplifters of archaeology, but I feel like even just in the choice of that organization says a lot. Why didn't they didn't have a section? It was like, okay, now let's talk about the man, and the man did this, and oh my gosh, and he did this. It was integrated into the story of archaeology. And so I just found that to be really interesting thing from the textbook. Another thing is, of course, when you look at any science history, or look at any science, anything right now, there's these roots and this desperation to claim white supremacy in everything. You had Theodore Roosevelt, one of y'all presidents, anyway, desperate to find the white mound people, even though they lived amongst indigenous people who clearly had all the capabilities to make these mounds, but they like, no, we're looking for the white mounders, because there's this desperation to call to this great heritage, or etc. I found it to be rather interesting, maybe a bit disturbing, the way in which at one point in the book they talk about the Iceman, which is the oldest human remains, I believe, that they found. I could be wrong, but they go into details talking about how they found all this stuff about the Iceman. We know everything about the Iceman. Oh my gosh, it's so cool, the Iceman. He has dark skin, he has curly black and brown hair, da 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 da. And then the diagram they give for the Iceman is this pale skinned man with straight hair. And it's an artist rendition, so somebody drew, it wasn't like, oh my gosh, we only have Billy on set, oh Billy, you be the Iceman. No, they intentionally made these intentional decisions. And I think when I see things like that, it shows the way the field itself hasn't yet come to examine these details about themselves and about their history. They say, okay, we know, they're like, oh no, okay, we were racist, so we were this, we were that. But like, what are the steps to really, really, really confront that? So yeah, that's what I got from the book. Sorry I didn't talk more about like carbon dating and stuff, but I just found those things to be really interesting, and just things that I found myself thinking about and wondering about. Of course, like I'm taking another class, like I said, about paleontology, so I can't help but make the parallels between the two. I apologize if I maybe talk about paleontology a little bit too much. But yeah, that's what I learned in week 3. Thank you.